During a teaching engagement at Camp Kosciuszko, information slowly began to trickle in that 10 unsuspecting shoppers were shot to death on the Jefferson Street tops in Buffalo. And then 10 days later, the national headlines completely shifted south, where a gunman entered Robb Elementary School and killed 19 innocent and helpless children and 2 adults, as law enforcement officers stood idly by in what was later described as a systemic failure. In August, by the time I had left the grounds of the Chautauqua Institution and lowered my fishing line over at Barcelona Pier, my phone lit up with text messages about a stabbing of a presenter on the stage of the amphitheater. And then last Sunday, I was horrified when I returned home from worship, only to learn that 5 people had perished and 25 others were injured in a shooting in a club in Colorado Springs. We have grown weary, and in our worst days, calloused to the violence reported in the national headlines. The endless supply of thoughts and prayers our elected leaders use to pacify us until the next tragic event are rendered just as empty as their campaign promises. We could name numerous attacks of violence. The unprovoked attack that cost a 38-year-old man from the Bronx on the New York subway his life. Thoughts and prayers. The killing of 3 University of Virginia football players. Thoughts and prayers. The attack on the spouse of a politician in their own home. Thoughts and prayers. The mystery that surrounds the deaths of 4 college students in Idaho. More thoughts and prayers. The Walmart employee that killed 6 on Tuesday night, thoughts and prayers. We are a nation filled with violence and hollow gestures of thoughts and prayers. How many times have we witnessed others throw up their arms and surrender to the faulty and dangerous opinion, it is what it is? Or fatalistically resigned to the fact that things will be what they will be. For a moment, consider the harm done when we playfully bat away an opportunity to hold someone accountable for their inappropriate behavior, couched in phrases such as, boys will be boys. This morning, I am happy to report that this is not the overarching message of Scripture. And let me, with much delight, assure you that there is no home for such a static, defeatist, and passive philosophy within the dynamics of our United Methodist theology. On this first Sunday of Advent, we turn to the 8th century prophet Isaiah's dream. He writes, this is what Isaiah, son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. And before we hear Isaiah's dream for the future of the holy city, it might be helpful to know that the contemporary circumstances the prophet's dream attempt to address. In the book, The Advent of Justice, J. Richard Middleton describes Jerusalem in this way. He writes, it was full of wisdom and knowledge of the world, full of silver and gold, full of horses and chariots and other implements of military power. And as Middleton argues, that most fundamentally Jerusalem was full of idols. We would do well to begin to draw parallels between Jerusalem in Isaiah's day and the United States of America in our own. A number of months ago, in the earliest days of, as the Russian forces entered Ukrainian territory, we watched as ordinary citizens were drawn into combat. The newly recruited Ukrainian soldiers, filled with equal measures of fear and duty, learned how to assemble bombs used to slow the Russian advancements in their communities that they guarded. In Isaiah's day, the Assyrian army is on the doorstep threatening to overthrow Judah's government, capture their elite citizens, and utterly destroy the very lives that they have always known. And perhaps like in Ukraine, the Judeans became resourceful to fight against their larger foe. Maybe everyone in Judah, from the high on down to the low, pitched in for the war effort, handing blacksmiths their farming equipment to be turned into weapons. In 1963, over 250,000 people gathered to listen to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. speak. On that day, King had prepared a short speech and was about to sit down when the gospel singer Mahalia Jackson called out, "Tell them about your dream, Martin. Tell them about the dream." I suspect the prophet Isaiah might have needed someone to encourage him to share his dream of a different and better future for Judah. I mean, just imagine for a moment the audio clips what they might have picked up that day. With every word of hope that emerged from Isaiah's lips, must have felt like they were sabotaged by the blacksmiths unaware of his dream, endlessly striking and hammering plowshares into swords and beating old pruning hooks into spears. The Austrian philosopher Ivan Ilyich once remarked, if you want to change a society, then you have to tell them an alternative story. The good news coming out of the South in the 8th century is that there are at least two prophets, Isaiah and Micah, that offer their society an alternative story. I mean, we are not sure if Isaiah borrows from Micah or Micah borrows from Isaiah, or they both borrow the dream from someone else. What we celebrate today is that someone dared to offer an alternative story. The dream began in the last days. The mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as chief among the mountains. It will be raised up above the hills, and all the nations will stream to it. In the ancient world, mountains were thin places where heaven and earth touched. They were sacred places where one might encounter the Lord, such as Moses when he received the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, or the prophet Elijah when he has a close encounter with the Lord on Mount Carmel. Or in the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus teaches his disciples in the Sermon on the Mount. Or in the Synoptic Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, when Peter, James, and John receive a special revelation from heaven on the Mount of Transfiguration. Perhaps we need more than ever to find a mountain, a thin place where we can lift up our eyes to see an alternative story unfold and a dream come true. In a surprising twist, the nations will flow to Zion, streaming like a river to the city, not to attack it this time, but to come to the temple in search of life-giving peace. Isaiah's dream continues when he predicts that one day many peoples will come and say, "Come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob." In Hebrew, the prophet employs the technical term, "go up," used for a faithful Judean on a pilgrimage to the Holy Temple. But in this alternative story of the future, The prophet expands the term to encompass every kindred, every tribe on this terrestrial ball to enter the holy city. Presumably those that gather do not do so under the banner of a particular world leader or a religious talking head, but under the reign of the Lord. Isaiah foretells that the Lord will teach us the Lord's ways so that we may walk in the Lord's paths. In other words, nations will appreciate the wisdom and benefits of following in God's ways of righteousness and justice and grace and love and mercy and forgiveness. And notice this morning that the people do not merely enter the holy city, but they exit Jerusalem as well, filled with the Lord's instruction to live beyond the city walls. And my suspicion is that the church ought to take note. I mean, we must not settle for coming to church on Sunday morning, but use Sunday morning as a springboard that launches us into ministry to a wider community. We might just be the dreamer of a different and better future that someone else desperately needed to hear yesterday. And surely the Lord can if the Lord can resolve the disputes of international proportions, the Lord can save us now. But keep in mind, the reality on the ground does not yet reflect Isaiah's dream. Before the prophet utters an alternative, he is brutally honest about the present. Isaiah speaks on behalf of the Lord and wags his finger at Judah, saying, I reared children and brought them up, but they have rebelled against me. The ox knows his master, the donkey his owner's manger, but Israel does not know. My people do not understand. And what the prophet says in disapproval is backed by the data when he cries that she, meaning Jerusalem, once was filled with justice and righteousness, used to dwell in her, but now murderers. We get the sense that everyone and everything has been tainted by sin. That even the worshipers are corrupted by lip service, and their hands are stained with blood. Violence floods the land and the national headlines with no end in sight, and yet Isaiah teaches us that Advent is a time for a new reality. The prophet dares to lead us with a dream of a future without wars and rumors of wars, and offers us an alternative ending of a promising world of hope and peace. Several years ago, I learned the backstory of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's poem, Christmas Bells. Longfellow was an aging single parent with sons scattered across the nation fighting in the Civil War. And on Christmas morning in 1863, Longfellow heard the bells in Cambridge ring in the birth of the Prince of Peace. And he listened to a choir lift their voices with the words of the angels, peace on earth. And for a period of 24 hours, there was a ceasefire. Longfellow, every parent knew wherever their sons happened to be, that they were safe and sound. He penned a poem to express his hope that peace would return to our divided nation. And interestingly, numerous biblical scholars refer to the prophet Isaiah as a poet. We hear in his dream the same longing for a different and better day. And instead of Jerusalem filled with the usual sounds of blacksmiths mass-producing weapons, Isaiah can already hear into the future the unusual sound echo throughout the kingdom of Judah, where blacksmiths beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Old Testament scholar Taylor Mayfield rightfully notes swords do not become plowshares without considerable effort. And perhaps one way to begin to dismantle the old arrangements of violence and death learned way back in the days of Cain and Abel is for us to relabel them as unrealistic. The future does not belong to violence and death, but to Isaiah's dream of peace, where nation will not take up sword against nation, and nor will they train for war anymore. And we caught a glimpse of, or a preview of this alternative story when Peter drew his sword and cut off the right ear of the high priest's servant in the gospel. Jesus healed the man's ear. He turned to Peter and commanded Peter, "Put your sword away." Maybe the hard work of making Isaiah's dream a reality is for us to dare to tell our society that such a dream even exists in the first place. We, like Isaiah, must communicate the dream of a different and better tomorrow. And if we are willing, the prophet welcomes us on this first Sunday of Advent saying, "Come, come, let us walk in the light of the Lord." I offer this to you this morning in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit. And all God's people said, Amen. This morning, I want to invite you to stand as you are able for our next hymn, number 210. I have been looking forward to this Advent hymn. Right now, this is my favorite Advent hymn, so sing it well, sing it beautifully, sing so we can hear one another. Let us sing together, number 210. Amen. You may be seated.